Keeping with our theme this morning, I'm going to look at faithfulness. Our theme has been remaining faithful. So I just want to look at what the Word has to say as far as faithfulness and some things that will really help us when it comes to remaining faithful. And when it comes to remaining faithful, the first thing I think about are the words of Jesus. And I'm going to go to this passage in just a minute, but let me just refer to it now. But Jesus said, when he said, well done, here's how he framed it. He said, well done, my good and faithful servant. He didn't say, well done, Pastor. Well done, child. He said, well done, my good and faithful servant. So when it comes to remaining faithful, I think first we need to make sure that we have the right frame of mind, frame of heart, and that is really what the Lord wants us to be faithful with, is being a servant. And so now let's go to Jesus' words, familiar passage, Mark 10:43. We all know this passage, but he says, but among you it will be different. Whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant. If you think about that, that is really upside down. Whoever wants, it's going to be different. How many of you know the church should be different? Pastors should be different. Leaders of ministries that are serving, it should be different. The way we run things, you should notice a difference. It's different than the corporate world. I think it was Pastor Tim that said, hey, recognize that those corporations, their value is the bottom line, the dollar. And there's, while certainly some of them go overboard with that, but we know in some ways for them to keep working, they have to look at that bottom line, but sometimes they put it way too much at the top. But for us, he said, you need to be a servant. Now, let me just give you the simple definition of a servant. It means attendant, minister, one who waits on tables, carrier to run errands. And here's what you have to realize. Being a servant is not easy. But you also need to make sure if you are a leader in ministry, you need to understand whose servant you are. We're God's servants. I'm not the servant of the people. I serve the people because I'm God's servant. And so that's why they can't tell me what to preach on Sunday. Now, if they keep telling me it's bad, I probably need to listen. Okay? I'm not saying that I don't hear them, but remember that you're God's servant. And so, because sometimes you got to do what they don't even want you to do. But it's good for them. Come on, if you're a parent, sometimes you got to do, you got to take the door off. You didn't hear James Johnson Hill yesterday, and actually I poked Jeff because Jeff took the door off one time, one of our boys. But being a servant, you have to realize that's what we need to, we want to remain faithful to be a servant. Now, it's not easy being a servant, especially when you're in the lead role. I heard, and actually I'm going to use I want to give credit to Gerald Brooks. If you haven't heard Gerald Brooks' podcast on leadership, they're really very good. He's out of Texas. Many of you might know him. He's a Rhema grad, does a lot on leadership. But I recently heard him say, he was on a podcast, that he was talking about leadership. And he said, usually reality is different than perspective. Before you're married, you have this perspective of what marriage is going to be like. And then you get married and reality sets in. You don't have kids, and then you have kids. My kid will never. Then you have kids, and you go, oh, no. And so he said, when it comes to leading, he said some people have, their perception is wrong. And he just gave this example. He said, if you think because you're the leader, and he was dealing with leadership and authority, and he said, you have some authority as a leader, but if you think that leading means you get to do what you want to do the way you want to do it all the time, you have no idea what it means to lead. Isn't that the truth? Really, when we lead, we are God's servant. We don't do what we want to do. We do what He wants us to do. And sometimes the very people we're serving don't say thank you. So this morning, could I say thank you? Because I thank you to all you pastors, ministers who have been faithful. You're here because you have been faithful. Thank you. Sometimes they may not say thank you, but thank you for leading, for being a servant. It's not easy. A couple of years ago, probably just about 2 years ago, I was talking to a friend of mine, and her husband had stepped out of ministry for a season, and she had actually gone into real estate and was doing very well and was prospering at it, was really loving it. I mean, she'd been in the ministry all of her life, but they were just in this little season. And then her husband, he's called, so he's wanting to get back in the ministry and start a church again. Now, they've started churches before, and she knows what it is, and so she's calling me, and she's saying, we're just about to sign on the dotted line, and I just feel this heaviness, and I'm trying to figure out if, maybe it's not God. Maybe we're not supposed to start a church again. And I said, because she said, I love real estate, and it's so easy. And I said, hey, don't you understand what's going on here? Ministry is heavy. Paul said, daily, the care of the church comes on me. Now you have to learn, like Tim said, get good at casting your cares. But here's why the ministry is so heavy. Because the value is so great. You're talking about people's eternity. We have an enemy. I said, yeah, go get into real estate. You ain't saving, as far as selling a house. I mean, now, because she's a believer, she'll use that as an influence. But come on, selling a house ain't going to get people to heaven. But you step in the ministry, come on. So we have to realize that it is weighty. And not only is it weighty, but it's weighty too because you're a servant. It's not always easy to be faithful to be a servant. Maybe it's easy to be faithful to be the boss, to be a star, to be a celebrity, to be a servant. Yeah, I've been faithful because being a servant requires dedication, sacrifice. It requires you to love people sometimes more than you love what you want to do when you want to do it because you want to do it. I know when I heard that just because you're in a position of leadership, people have this perspective that you get to do what you want to do when you want to do it. No, you just lost all rights to do what you want to do the way you want to do it, when you want to do it. And so, but we got to be willing to serve. Jesus' words still stand today. If you want to be a leader in the church, you must be a servant. So to remain faithful, what are we being faithful at? You got to make sure that you are always His servant. Remember this too. The higher up you go in responsibility, the more submitted you must become. The higher up in authority you go, the more submit. The lower you have to come in saying, God, I am your servant. I don't do what I want to do, but I do what you want to do. Now, here's what we want to hear. And I'll now go to this passage, Luke 19:17. Jesus said, well done, the king exclaimed. You are a good servant. You are a good servant. You have been faithful with the little I entrusted you, so you will be governor over 10 cities as your rewards. Now, we all want to hear well done. And he's going to say, well done, you've been a good servant. You've remained faithful serving me. And Jesus said this too, and I think maybe it was James Johnson Hill that said, in the word faithfulness, the root of it is faith. And really, faithfulness equals trustworthy, that you are trustworthy. God trusted you with those people. He trusted you with that platform, that gift, that ability. But remember, the root word of that faithful or faithfulness is faith. And you have to have faith in God to be faithful. You have to have faith in Him that if you're going to take the role of a servant and you're going to be busy caring for others, that God's going to take care of you. He's going to take care of your family. And then He makes this statement in this parable. He says, you have been faithful with little. I think it was Charles Neiman say this at a conference I was at years ago, and it has just stuck with me. And it really you ever had your they ate your lunch? This kind of ate my lunch. But he said, here's what he said. He said, the hardest thing you will ever do is to be faithful over little. And he said, that's why so many never get to the next level, because they despise the little they have. I tell you, and sometimes it's tough when you see, yeah, they don't even believe in faith and they're prospering and their building is paid for. They don't, you know, all these things that can come at you, then you begin to, well, Lord, you're not, or my step, this, that. Be faithful with the little, and then you'll be trusted with much. And it goes back to that gratitude. I was reading the Message Bible this morning, and it says in Psalms, I don't remember what Psalms it was just in my reading plan, but he said, the password to God's presence is thank you. And I thought, isn't that good? The password to get into God's presence is thank you. And you know what? I just decided, because I had a real problem with ingratitude. Well, I didn't realize it was ingratitude. It came in the form of discontentment. And then I remember one time we were riding in the car and I was just kind of saying, well, this hasn't happened and that hasn't happened. And Jeff said, why are you so discontent? Don't you see what God has done? And the truth was no. I was so busy about what I wanted God to do that even he was speaking to me about that he wanted to do, that I had forgotten to be grateful for what he had done and what he was doing. And so I determined, I just kind of searched my heart and I thought, Lord, why am I so discontent in this season? It was kind of like, well, you're showing me the next thing, but I'm so busy looking at the next thing that I'm not being faithful with today. I got to be I got to look ahead, but I got to be faithful. So I just decided this. I thought, you know what, Lord, there's some things I cannot do. I cannot be the smartest person, the wisest, the best communicator, but I can be your most grateful child. And so I thought, you know what, every day, I'm walking on my prayer walk. Thank you that I have 10 toes. Because somebody that morning in my church I was praying for them because they were having some toes amputated because of diabetes. So I thought, Lord, thank you. I got 10 toes. Thank you for every one of them. Thank you for that tree over there. Thank you for this neighborhood. Thank you for, Lord, thank you, thank you. And every day, that attitude of gratitude helps us to say, well done, and it helps us to be thankful over those little things. If God has entrusted you with people, we need to be faithful to serve them. Now, come on, if you are a pastor, even if you're a minister in another way, maybe your children, the empty seats can get you. They can talk to you. And they can make you not see the people who did come. And I just decided I just decided, you know what, Lord? Once that countdown goes, it's all about the people that are here. Now, during the week, we're going to work on getting the people that weren't here, reaching out to those who haven't come. But right here, right now, it's about the people in the seats and the people that are watching online. It's not about the people that aren't here. We have to be faithful with what God has given us. And then I want to just talk about 3 things that every faithful leader recognizes, and here they are. And these maybe ministered to me. Again, this was the podcast. Some of these are from the podcast, Gerald Books. Just want to give him credit. But they just helped me be faithful with what the Lord has given me. And here's the first truth. Everything is not equal. And go back to that parable again. Matthew, and I'll explain this. Matthew 25:14. Again, the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by the story of a man going on a long trip. He called together his servants and entrusted his money to them while he was gone. He gave 5 bags of silver to one, 2 bags of silver to another, and 1 bag of silver to the last, dividing it in proportion to their abilities. He then left on this trip. Now, listen, we got to understand this in ministry. Everything is not equal. There are some people who were given 5 talents, some who were given 3, and then I'm glad for the 1 I have. Come on. And sometimes we need to realize that, and we need to celebrate. But everything is not equal. The size of your city isn't equal. Now, understand, none of those things can be excuses. There are things that we need to look at to remain faithful, not to not be faithful, but we got to be faithful with where we are. This means as a leader, don't compare, and you've heard Pastor Tim said it, and he's said it for years, don't compete, complain, or compare. And don't compare. Don't compare a banana with an orange, or get out of the fruit. Don't compare a banana with a potato. Don't compare your city. Don't compare who God's called you to, your giftings. Sometimes people have said, because, and recognize this, I recognize a woman pastor is a little bit out of the norm, but maybe we could say it's above average. It's out of the box. Maybe it's above, not below. But people sometimes say, and I'm kind of joking there, but people sometimes say, well, do the people in your church have a problem with the woman pastor? And I say, well, not the people in my church. And so God will bring you. Now we've had to bring understanding to some people who had the right heart. But listen, it is not my role. I am not getting out of my lane. It is not my role to convince anything or anyone, let me rephrase it. It is not my role to convince anyone that a woman pastor should be. That is not my role. If that was my role, I'd spend all my ministry trying to convince the unconvinced. My role is to minister to the people that God sends me who don't have a problem with that. Now, if they need understanding, there are people, literally, I was sharing this with Pastor Nate's son. I forgot your name. Pastor Nate's son. Pastor in Houston. New Braunfels. Pastor, this young guy came to church one time, and he came out of a Baptist background, but somebody invited him, and afterwards he came and he said, now, they said you weren't real, but you are. And I was like, okay. I said, well, I'm real. And they said, no, well, they said that women pastors couldn't do that, but I experienced God. I learned something. I felt God this morning. You are real. I said, I am. Now, listen, I can give him understanding, okay? I'm not saying that I wouldn't ever. Obviously, you work with people. But now, listen, as a leader, everything is not equal. There's going to be times, too, that it's going to be a little harder for me. But I remember something Brother Copeland said years ago. He said a pastor called him. Actually, this Pastor James, because I don't want to get over any problem, so I'm just going to say he was your color. Am I safe with that? He was your color? No. You got to use the right words. No, I'm just teasing. But he was a black pastor. And he called Brother Copeland. He said, it's not fair. Now, this was years ago. He said, this is just not fair. Because I'm a black pastor, the banks don't want to give me money. Brother Copeland said, that's not a problem. That's to your advantage. He said, it is? He goes, yeah, because you got to trust God. All those white boys, they're going to get in so much trouble. They're going to get in debt. Because they're going to hand it to them, but how beneficial it's going to be for you, because you got to trust God. And so sometimes, there may be things it's not equal, but trust God. Grace isn't fair either. Aren't you glad grace isn't fair? And don't compare yourself with others. God gives people T.D. Jakes, it's like my husband says, when he preaches, and he's talking about Jesus calming the storm. When he's describing that storm, you feel the water on your face. I cannot be T.D. Jakes. I am a teacher line upon line. And so you know what? To be faithful, you have to realize everything is not equal. You are not going to have everything that every other minister has, but you do have something, which brings us to the next thing that we need to understand. And that is, here's number 2, gifts and talents may differ, but the measurement of success that Jesus uses is the same. And here it is. You ready? Back to the parable. Matthew 25:19. After a long time, their master returned from his trip and called them to give an account of how they used his money. The servant to whom he had entrusted 5 bags of silver came forward with 5 more and said, Master, you gave me 5 bags of silver to invest, and I've earned 5 more. The master was full of praise. Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities. So celebrate together. Now listen, now here's a servant who received 2 bags, not 5. 2 bags of silver came forward and said, Master, you gave me 2 bags of silver to invest, and I've earned 2 more. The master says the same thing. Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together. Listen, regardless of the talents or platforms God has given you, the measurement God uses for every one of us is the same. Were you faithful with the talents, the abilities, the platform that I gave you? You know what? We don't all have the same platform. You can't create a platform for yourself. I remember years ago when I was in a season, I had I'd been on the mission field, and just after this, I went into full-time ministry, and that's where I met Tim and Alicia and Brother Jim. But I was in a season, and I'd been on the mission field. I'd, been worked in children's ministry, children's pastor, but I was just in a season where I needed to go sit. And I went to sit at a church. Actually, some of you may remember Carl Strader in Lakeland, and just a wonderful ministry that they had back then. And I went over there, and I was in like the college and career class. And I was more in the career at that time than in the college. I've been out of college for a while. But we were in just a small class of 40 people. And the guy would ask, now I've already, been in ministry on a church staff. And I'm sitting there, and I would I could easily answer those questions. I could teach his class. I had absolutely no favor in that class. And they'd be like, you're the student. I have the answer. And the teacher never calls on you. He never called on. I had no favor. They did a children's outreach. They were going to go into a community. These were adult singles, but it's more, again, they were college and career. And they were going to put this on. And I thought, man, I could run this whole thing. I'd ran a children's ministry before. And they finally said, can you do this one little small thing up there? You almost want to be insulted. But you know what? God did not give me, He did not want me to have that platform. I was supposed to go there and sit for a season. It was just a place to sit. And so they let me do this one part. And when I did that one part, they go, you're pretty good at that. Thank you. Thank you. But even then, they didn't ask me to run the whole thing. You know what? Listen, if God doesn't give you the platform, and don't complain because He didn't give you somebody else's platform. There are people that are in ministry that you think, how did they get on TV? Who, as I think Tim said, it's none of your business. Not your business. Just stay in your lane. Listen, we need to make sure when we're faithful that we are faithful with the platform, with the people that God has entrusted us with, and that we serve them well. It's like God said, Jane, if you're not serving the people well that I've sent you, why would I send you more? If you don't think they're worth anything, why would you think 10,000 people are worth anything, or 500, 10? Why would you? You don't think people are, come on, you got to be faithful. Faith is when we trust God. Well, I do want to give you this quote. Actually, it's a quote from Gerald Brooks. Faith is when we trust God. Faithfulness is when God can trust us. Come on. God's got to be able to trust us. And if we're faithful over little, with the platform, with the talents that He has given us, then we'll be rewarded by God. And you just need to ask yourself the question when it comes to remaining faithful. Are you faithful with the platform and the talents that God has given you? I like to. And if you have been given a talent, thank God for it. Jeff will probably remember the coach. I don't remember the coach, but I like his saying. He always told his players, listen, If you were born on third base, don't act or go through life acting like you hit a triple. Come on. You were born on third base. You know, some people say, Pastor Jane, how do you teach like that? I don't know. It just comes out. I mean, when I sit down, now you have to develop your gift. But I don't know how they stand up there and sing like that. I stand up there and it does not sound like that. Come on. And so be grateful for what you have, the different gifts that you have, and thank God for them. Make sure, because God does reward faithfulness. The measurement is the same. Here's the third one, and it is we are responsible for what God has given us. Matthew 25:24, we know what happens in this parable. Then the servant with the one bag of silver came and said, Master, I knew you were a harsh man, harvesting crops you didn't plant and gathering crops you didn't cultivate. I was afraid I would lose your money, so I hid it in the earth. Look, here is your money back. But the master replied, You wicked and lazy servant. If you knew I harvested crops I didn't plant and gathered crops I didn't cultivate, why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? At least I could have gotten some interest on it. Listen, you can never say, well, God hasn't given me anything. Well, I don't have much, so I'm not going to do anything. Got to be responsible. He had one talent, and God expected him to be faithful with what he had given him. God has given you gifts. Be faithful with what he has given you. Gerald Brooks said this too. Someone may have bigger and better opportunities. You may feel like you've been given less, but you are no less responsible for the platform or the gifts you have. God wants you to be responsible for what you have. And you have to be responsible to produce fruit with what you have. You know what? It's not wrong, even in a ministry, to make sure you're bearing fruit. Make sure there's help there. Make sure your staff are bearing fruit. If somebody's been in a position and there's no fruit, after a while, you got to figure out maybe they're in the wrong place. You know, some people are not happy with the people God has given them. They look over there and wish I had that talent. I wish I had their. No, be faithful with the people that God has given you. So they're not the most talented, but they're yours. You don't go and say, I wish I had those children. Well, sometimes you do. You all do know that's why we adopted. It's because then you really can say, I did not teach them that. They got that before they came to me. Anyway, come on. And here's the thing. We are responsible to bear fruit. We are responsible to use our time wisely, responsible to steward the people, the talents that God gives us. Don't ever desire recognition without responsibility. Well, I want to be recognized for that. Well, then just know you got to be responsible. Recognition without responsibility is a prescription for disaster. Be responsible with the platform that you have. Be responsible with the people that you have. You're going to make mistakes. Don't let your mistakes define you. I heard this about mistakes. I thought it was good. It says this guy says to his friend, they were actually watching this movie together as a cowboy flick, and the guy said, I'll bet you this hero was riding off, and he said, I'll bet you $50 the hero rides off the cliff. And the friend says, okay, I'll take you on. He said, let's watch. But sure enough, they watched, and the hero rides off the cliff. And the guy takes his $50, his friend takes his $50 from his friend, and then he gives it back. He said, look, I got to give you back this $50. He said, because I've already seen this movie, and I knew the hero was going to ride off the cliff. And he said, well, no, keep the $50 because I've seen it before, but I just didn't think he was going to do the same stupid thing twice. Now, listen, if you have one talent or be faithful, and everybody's going to make mistakes, but be faithful enough, be wise enough to learn from your mistakes and move on. Can you hand me my little baton there? I want to finish this way this morning, just share something with you. Hopefully that'll stay there, about legacy. because I really believe God always rewards faithfulness. He said, this way he said, that's my measure of success. You're not going to be rewarded for the talent you have because that's God given. You're going to be rewarded, or the platform that you have, that's God given. But you are going to be rewarded if you were faithful to that platform, if you were faithful to that talent, if you were faithful to those people that God gave you. But faithfulness really isn't finished until you pass the baton. Come on. And I'm going to do something now. And don't dislike me for this, because I should be sitting too, okay? I should be sitting too. But I just want to do this real quick. If you're in your 20s, 30s, or 40s, I want you to stand right now. If you're here in the building and you're in your 20s, 30s, or 40s, stand. This is AFCM. This is the future of AFCM right here. The rest of us, our job is to pass the baton. Now listen, we're not out of the race. Don't go to the grandstands yet. Thank you. Y'all can sit down. As you can see, we got to get some more people to pass the baton to. And faithfulness, remaining faithful, is really about passing that baton. So you got to believe God for the people that you can pass the baton to, but we got to really be aware. Hey, these are the people. We got to leave them something, and we are, thank God, leave them something that's fruitful and healthy. But we need to work on that a little bit. We need to work on passing the baton down. And again, I heard a podcast, and some people say, "Wow, that was good." Well, just listen to wise people, and you'll be wiser. And I'm going to even be wiser because I'm going to listen to Tim's new podcast too. I really am excited. I'm waiting for Nurture Network one. It's like the little kid waiting for Christmas Day. I'm waiting for that first podcast. I've already listened to the Inside Out ones. Hey, the Bible says, "Hang with wise people, and you'll be wiser." So I'm smart. Now, listen, I'm smarter because of them. But I listened to this podcast. I like to give credit. It was by Christine Kane. And she was saying, really, I'm entering into that time of ministry where God's saying to me, the most important thing right now is to set up the handoff and to make sure that I'm ready to pass the baton. That really is remaining faithful. We want the ministry to continue. But when I started thinking about that, there's several things that we need to know when it comes to being faithful and passing it off. You know what? First of all, we got to be faithful to believe God for the right people to pass it off to. We got to be faithful to make sure that the people are ready to take the baton. Because as I've been meditating on this, and we're at this place in this church that I'm thinking about, okay, God, praying about, who are we passing this baton off to? And last year we celebrated 23 years in ministry, and the whole thing was about legacy. And we had our young people come up. I mean, we said, hey, it's all about get a young leader in there, pass the baton. Don't step out of the way. Keep leading, but make sure you're getting them ready and make sure they are ready. And you are responsible, if you have people, to get them ready or to believe for the people if they're not there yet. But here's what you want to do. You are responsible to hand it off to the right people. And let me give you some wisdom on that too. Think about a relay race. You know what? The people that are in that race, they are proven runners. They've already proved that they can do the laps. I'm not handing my baton, because see, this really is not my baton. This is what the Lord spoke to me. Jane, remember, it is not your baton. It's my baton. And I gave it to you. Now you got to hand it off when I tell you to. Some people are like, God saying, hand off that baton. No, I want to keep my baton. Now don't hand it off too early because they won't be ready. But listen, I'm not handing it off to anybody that can't do laps with me. Because I got to know that you can run this lap. And so remember that, you got young people coming on board, and it's tough when you don't have the baton, all the authority or the vision, but I'm making you run the laps. But I'm going to tell you why, because I'm getting you ready, Because when I hand it off to you, you got to be ready to take off. You can't go, what do I do? What do I do with? So it's to be faithful, I got to tell them what to do. So really, those of us who remained seated, we got a big job to do. Our job is not over. We got to make sure that we are handing off that baton and we're not giving somebody something that is not fruitful, falling apart. No. We want them to be standing there ready because we have trained them. Can you put up that picture? I love this picture. Now look at that. He is ready to go. You know what happened? We just had the Olympics. You know what happened with the Americans? Was that they messed up the baton change. And the men's relay race, and I don't know what was the last track Olympics, whenever that was. And they messed it up. And they messed it up because the handoff was bad. Listen, you got to be ready for that handoff. Because what you hold in your hand is very precious. We've just been inspired. I'm looking at John Freed. Wayne Freed, part of AFCM for years. And he just handed over. They passed the baton to John. How many years you been pastoring now, John? 4? Almost 4? And John's redoing the sanctuary. I mean, they've grown. They're flourishing. Man, I want to sit down with Wayne and say, Wayne, how'd you do that? Because it's not easy. They hand off your baton. My nephew Chris is here, and his wife, and I first met his pastors in Virginia when Pastor Arlie, who's now in heaven, was handing off the baton to his son Charlie. And Pastor Arlie, who is pretty bold, said to me, and literally when he passed off the baton, the church doubled. Am I right? The church literally doubled, but he did a good job of passing off the baton. But he said, man, it was hard. He said, because I woke up every day and I had no decisions to make. But he was there. Listen, sometimes once you pass off the baton, and it's a process, then sometimes you got to go to the stands and you got to cheer them on. Got to cheer them on. If they're doing, I hope this church, triples. Come on, it's not about us. It's about the kingdom of God. I need to set them up because that is my legacy. God is going to hold me accountable. And so I'm out of here. No. Get in the stands and cheer them on. And I'm not saying leave heaven and get in the heavenly stands. I'm saying stay in the earthly stands and cheer them on. Let me just close with this. Let me close. I don't think I ever read it. 2 Timothy 4:7 says, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race, and I have remained faithful. And now the prize awaits me. And I think it's good for us to just stop in light of passing on the baton and remaining faithful. I think it's good for us to just stop and remember who Paul was writing to. He was writing this to his legacy. He was writing it to Timothy. And you talk about talk about a big baton to pass off. Now, Timothy was just one that he passed it off to, but he prepared Timothy. You see the letters he wrote to him, how he instructed him. Timothy felt prepared. And then after Timothy was in ministry, Paul, what was it? I think one of them used the scripture, don't despise your youth. He kept encouraging him, writing to him. But in the end, he said, it's yours. I fought the good fight. I have finished my race and I've remained faithful. Now the prize awaits me. But he could say that to Timothy because Timothy was prepared to take the baton and run on. Listen, that's what all of us want to be able to say while we're still here to the person. If we pass it off, and some of you may be 10, 15 years out, but that's not it. You got to start preparing now. Make sure that you're ready to pass that baton to remain faithful. Amen. Well, I hope you got something out of that this morning. I just want to say this as we close. I'm just so thankful for everyone that's been a part of this, the ministers that have ministered. I guess the one word when I was praying about this morning and praying about what has happened, I just thought, Lord, if there was one word that I could explain or that I could use to describe what has happened, it's just rich. I feel richer
because I've heard these ministers and because I've been with all of you. Just the fellowship makes us richer. All that I gleaned from every one of you, we are enriched.